more of a challenge, especially for a museum that is comfortable in its own traditional space. And this is where the Creative Museum has been very, very inspiring, and it's allowed us to explore, we say, outside the box, by working with our local maker community, who tend to be quite underground as opposed to over the ground. So I have a PowerPoint presentation.
Una presentazione in PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Let's see. I will close it. I'm not the technician, but I can help. It's number 2.
Scusate, non sono il tecnico, ma forse posso dare una mano. Ecco.
And click twice on the
Okay. This is what the galleries look like. They're dark, they're slightly mysterious. The collection is mostly paper-based because we are a museum that comprises of rare books, manuscripts, prints, drawings. So I don't know if any of you have been to the Chester Beatty Library. Anybody? Wow, yay! So you've been in there. So you can tell you're a person next to you do bing bong, and I've been to the Chester Beatty Library. It's quite a unique museum within Ireland because it houses a collection of Islamic, East Asian and European rare books, religious materials, decorative objects, silk robes, snuff bottles. No other museum in Ireland has such a collection, so already people look at us with mystery. As you can see, the galleries are quite traditional as well. And there really are beautiful displays. But what I really wanted to do is I'd love to hack this collection. And that really scares our director and curators. They do not want us to hack the collections because they're safe behind these glass cases. So we've tried to very gently encourage them to understand what hacking means or how to unpick the collection through creative, innovative ways. We're doing it already. For most museum practitioners, it's called interpretation. But with the Creative Museum, we can have lots of fun exploring and experimenting. And that's really what we'd like to do. How do we experiment with this Japanese scroll, for example? So when we were organising the Dublin meeting for the Creative Museum, part of it is to have a public debate. And we said, well, will people come to the Chester Beatty Library for a public debate? Because we've never held one before. So we started looking outside the library and we said, well, why don't we approach the Science Gallery? They're really cool, they're really hip. They've got loads of 18 to 25-year-olds. We don't have 18 to 25-year-olds coming to our museum, really. So we started talking to people in the community, particularly through the science community. And we started partnering with the Festival of Curiosity, which is a science festival. And we said, look, would you like to be part of this debate? Can you introduce us to people? And they introduced us to the Science Gallery. And through that, they said, yes, we'd like to work with you. We know about Cap Science. We've worked with them before. Yes, we'd like to hear about what you have to say. And yes, you know, let's have this public debate in our space. And so they started mentoring us, which was really, really, really helpful. We used Eventbrite. I've never used Eventbrite before. I know for some people that might sound very strange, but we use Word and we use an online booking system in our museum, but we don't use Eventbrite. So that was a new tool for us because it collects data, but you can also, it's a very useful tool. But we brought our museum to another venue, which again might sound strange for some people, but it was a very big step for us to go out into a science museum as opposed to a traditional museum. And we also invited museums and makers to meet in this space. So it was like a neutral space outside of the museum, and we documented the event. So I will be showing a video just to show you what this event looked like, because I suppose evidence is seeing. And the lights, if the lights could go down. The film, yeah. Okay.
We are here tonight to discuss about how museums, professionals and makers can work together. Creative Museum, it's a 3 years project aiming at investigating creative practices and maker and museum collaboration.
For me, creative practice is really about bringing together people with very different backgrounds.
What's neat about this conversation is that we all do it in different ways based on where we're coming from and the institutions and the people that we're working with.
The more I work with organizations, the more I work with people solving different issues that they encounter in their life, the more I realize creativity is literally everywhere.
There are many interesting ways how you can present collections in the gallery, how you can really invite new audiences to give a new layer of understanding of their collections, a new context.
We start always with this question, what do you dream to do in a museum? And sometimes we have people who have a lot of imagination and funny things.
Museums and makers, I think, are probably really natural, bedfellows. I think they're the really great fit of people that could work together.
Museums and makers can work together both by communicating better about what they do, how they do it, and also teaching each other, I think.
Working with the museum was never something that I had ever thought about before. I wouldn't know how to approach a museum. I wouldn't know who to talk to.
Museum staff and makers really have a lot more in common than they realize. They're both very enthusiastic about details. They like to know how things are made. They like to get into the nitty-gritty.
They've been working together ever since the first museum was opened hundreds of years ago. And it's just a matter of do we accept that they're actually at the heart of our institutions rather than at the fringes.
They both have something each other needs, really. I think one of the great things that museums have is presence and space. They have a physical presence, but they also have a reputational presence. They're out in the world.
The most popular place in the Science Center is the little corner where boys can tinker with Lego or old radios and stuff like that. They're makers and they're very much part of our museum culture.
The maker community are seen as people who, it's almost like a philosophy. They're really confident in just trying things out.
Makers are tinkerers. They're out there inventing and trying and iterating and experimenting with new ideas. And I think not just museums and galleries, but anybody anywhere in the world can benefit from that sort of approach.
I thought it was really powerful when everyone in the event had to make a duck from Lego, and to see the variety of ducks and the variety of mutations that arose from that experiment.
If you can get someone into your space, into your exhibition, into your event, making things, not only have they learned something, they've created something. And that's part of the co-creative process, which I think is so exciting about museums in this century.
Culture Tech was really launched for that purpose. It was about celebrating that confluence between arts and culture and technology and design and all of those sort of elements which tend to bleed into each other. And what's really interesting for us is that the lines which used to be quite clear are really very fuzzy now.
Both sides are meeting on an equal playing ground, but making something that neither one of them would have come up with on their own.
If you have a 3D printer and a lab in the museum, and you can print, you can make a reference to the collection, then in a way you are demystifying things. You're not having an altar out of the collection.
This is a 3D printed object made last semester by one of our interns, a new media artist.
It's a great example of the way museums and the stories that museums contain can be inspiration and raw material for new objects.
If you look at all the exciting startups, all the exciting projects in the public domain, all of those things are about that confluence of different worlds coming together.
One thing I really want people to take away is to be inspired. I want people to go talk to other makers, find out who their local makers are.
To know each other, to have time to speak, to explain their skills, their jobs, what they want, the aims, for example. It's important.
It's wonderful to be both supporting and part of the Creative Museum project. I think this is an area that there's a lot of demand for. Our audiences really want new developments in this sphere, and I think sharing knowledge and new best practice is really going to result in a lot of new ideologies, new projects, new ways of doing things, and a new definition of what both maker and museums are.
So if I could get the lights back on, that would be great. And just to give you an idea, that was the first time we as a traditional museum walked into a science gallery space and met, there's one guy there who works for the European Space Agency. I'm still going, wow, I met a guy who works for the European Space Agency. He makes rockets and all that kind of stuff. For a traditional museum, that for me is really exciting. For the makers, they go, yeah, he makes rockets, he works for the European Space Agency, so what? So that in a way, I'm fascinated by our local maker community because they are so inventive and they're so creative. But then the maker community are a little bit shy of museums because they see museums as these closed spaces. They don't know how to approach museums. So this public debate was a really good opportunity for both museums and makers to meet and speak and hopefully collaborate in the future. Irish people talk a lot, but Irish people, we found out in the feedback, are quite shy unless they have a pint of Guinness in their hand. So we did have a reception afterwards where we encourage people to meet and talk and encourage people to exchange cards or encourage people to get to know each other. I called it speed dating without the romance. So that, you know, this is an opportunity for you to now take it to the next step. But the experiences that we as the Chester Beatty Library have discovered is we've now started to meet all these makers within the community, and we're approaching these makers to help us with our public programme. And one of our public programmes is called Chester Beatty's Creative Lab. It's a creative lab. We don't have a lab, but we're calling it the Creative Lab for teenagers. And we're now collaborating with animators, electronic engineers, scientists. We're bringing in our traditional artists as well to co-create and collaborate with us for our public programs. So this is the starting point for us as a museum because we'd like to expand this program for our adults. And we're starting to work with our younger children as well. So out of this public debate, we are still continuing our collaboration with the Festival of Curiosity, which is the science festival in July. We've brought our teenagers out to the Dublin Maker, which is an annual summer event where all the makers display their experiments and ideas in a university space. We've actually gone out to a hackerspace, their neighbours, and we spent 3 or 4 hours meeting these hackers, and they offered us cups of tea and they showed off our space, and we were like, wow, this is absolutely amazing. You've got 3D printers, you've got lock pickers. I have no idea what a lock picker is still, but I'm open to learning. But I'm totally fascinated by this space, and they're really happy to share. And that's the most important thing. And then they came back to the Chester Beatty Library for a cup of tea and cake, and they went to see the library. So we would like to continue and experiment and work with these local hackers. And now we have an open dialogue with the Science Gallery Dublin, because before they never really returned my emails or they never really returned my phone calls because they're so busy. And the images that you see on the right-hand side is a collaboration with Irish Design, which is a one-year celebration of Irish design. And not only did we bring our teenagers and our children over for a summer workshop, but the Festival of Curiosity asked if we could co-host a workshop during the July festival. And we did a Japanese origami demonstration in the Irish Design Space, which is right next door. So there's all sorts of collaborations now happening between us and the science maker community. I've also joined Twitter, which might be a shock for some people. I never tweeted in my life until after the Dublin meeting in April. And this is just a tweet about the hackers coming to the Chester Beatty Library. So it's a really good way of getting out into that unknown space, which is the hacker space. And they just said, look, we're spending time in the Chester Beatty Library. Isn't it great? La da da da. It's a great step. Now it's slow. And I suppose the head person of this hacker space Greece, has been a little bit resistant to museums. I think he's had some bad experiences in the past. So what we were laughing yesterday, I've started to pop up at festivals where I know that they're going to be, and I go, "Hello, Jeffrey, it's me." And he tells me to go away. I'm disturbing him. I go, "Okay," and then I pop up again somewhere else. And eventually I've started to wear him down. And now he's beginning to smile. And now he's beginning to approach the Chester Beatty Library. So it does take time. It's relationship building. It might be a little bit difficult at the beginning because there is an element of social awkwardness with some of the makers and some of museum staff as well. So its persistence does pay off. I'm going to show you a video in a few minutes as well, just to say that we, on the basis of this Dublin debate, thought that we should now document what this collaboration, this creative practice looks like. It's part of our case studies, our analysis of different examples from the different partner countries. So we're doing it in two stages. We're capturing co-creation and collaboration in the Science Gallery because they're probably the best known in Ireland. And then in 2 weeks' time, we're filming our teen club where they're working with a scientist and an artist based on Fibonacci. And for me, Fibonacci is a new word as well. I'm learning all the time, because I come from a more traditional background of just doing very traditional arts education. So this is a new learning curve for me. And I'm not afraid to say I don't know what Fibonacci is. It's just part of the learning process. So this is just a short film of showing within the Science Gallery the collaborative practice between artists, makers, scientists and the museum. And lights. If I could get the lights to go down, please.
Potrei chiedervi di abbassare le luci, grazie.
For a science gallery, I think co-creation means when the kind of producer-consumer boundary is broken down, when the institution and the individual kind of blur a little bit. When a co-creative spirit is really healthy, you have your audience approaching you and treating your institution as a facilitator of their vision. And that's what I think success really is for co-creation. It's where people feel that their creative initiative is being rewarded and you're facilitating them to have creative outputs that they couldn't without your institution. Science Gallery is fundamentally interdisciplinary. We have scientists exhibiting, but actually more artists. And in between we have designers, crafters, makers, all sorts of people. And that presents a lot of challenges because the language you use around exhibiting, around proposing works, around commissions, around engaging with the public for those different community groups is utterly different. When you get designers, working with fine artists or makers, it pushes them outside of their comfort zone, which is wonderful, but also you don't want people to feel uncomfortable. So as an institution, I think it's our responsibility to facilitate those interactions to make that a fruitful collaboration. Science Gallery Dublin tries to act as a mediator between art and science. Just like an institution and its audience can work together in co-creation, so can these two different or perceived different cultures of art and science, or design and crafters, makers, engineers, performers. Any of these disciplines can be crossed if you take this sort of co-creative, collaborative approach. In our chemistry exhibition, we had a bring your own periodic table of elements, and anyone could bring in any object which had to do an element that they wanted to exhibit. What we didn't expect was that calcium would be a really popular element, and I think on day 3 we had to start emptying the ostrich eggs out of that, because everyone would bring in an ostrich egg, tag it where they'd gotten it, who brought it in, and the thing was totally full. The community for a museum, a gallery, an institution, that's really up to the community to self-define. And they may see themselves as fans, as supporters. They may see themselves as militant critics who really want the institution to be better, and they're like a gadfly encouraging it to be the way they really hope it could be. But in reality, it's not really up to you as a practitioner or an institution. And that's a wonderful thing, because then you can have multiple communities, you can have communities that overlap, and communities that take action and decide things for themselves and their own relationship to the institution. One thing about success for Science Gallery is that we want our audience to have a really personal experience, which roots Science Gallery in their sort of social experience, their civic experience. And to me, it means a lot when you see like two 17-year-olds come through the door on their first date. And that's kind of better in a way than a bunch of 16-year-olds being brought in by a teacher, kind of dragging their feet, don't want to be there, because those 17-year-olds are making this choice of their own volition. It's going to fit into their sort of social calendar, their experience, what they want to do, and they're making that decision by themselves. So I think we have a real chance of keeping them engaged with art, with science, with culture, if we get them to think about how Science Gallery fits in with their life. Probably my favorite things at Science Gallery are initiatives that blur the boundary between like an exhibition, an event, a performance, and so people don't exactly know what they are, but they like them. That's what I would really like to do more of, more sort of experimental, I guess you call them exhibitions, but things which are kind of undefinable in format. So people come in, they say, I don't exactly know what this is, but I love it.
We can have the lights up. Thank you. That's a preview. So this is not a public film yet. We showed it yesterday at our meeting, and the person who's being interviewed speaks very, very quickly. So we may have to put subtitles. So just to say, if you didn't understand them, don't worry. But also some of the content might be a little bit too much, especially the blood. So we might edit that as well. So no offense was intended there. That's a raw, we need the feedback from our project partners. But that film was made in order to illustrate the collaboration between artists, engineers, scientists, makers, and a gallery, but also how the public engages with the space and how they contribute to exhibitions, and their voices are also being heard. So this is something that we're trying to encourage in our own museum. Resistance does exist in our museum, but they're slowly beginning to understand that this is possible. It will take time. But in order to prepare for these types of interviews, we've consulted Dawn, and Dawn is here as part of our consultant. I didn't make up the interview questions myself. It was part of this collaborative process again. And part two is we'll film our own Chester Beatty's Creative Lab for Teens, the workshop. I mentioned the Fibonacci on Friday the 30th of October with our teenagers, our artists, our scientists, and the museum itself. These are our creative teens. And what in traditional formal Irish education, children are not being encouraged to experiment. That's really, really disturbing. I find that disturbing. They're just told how to learn a subject. And what are we learning from these creative practices? We're promoting creativity and experimentation and innovation, and not to be frightened by making mistakes, and that hopefully you will find throughout the rest of our project. And these are the plans hopefully for part of doing Museums and Makers, Inspiring Each Other, part 2. And I've run out of time, I've spoken too much, I do apologise, but just to say thank you, and if you've any questions, please do ask afterwards. Thank you.